Alright, let's start with the short version. Do you like games with a ton of secrets that wildly change your playthrough if you find them? Do you like RPGs with simple systems that can be manipulated to absolutely crack the game wide open? Do you like claustrophobic horror stories of people who are isolated by situations far too large for them to understand, like the manhwa Sweet Home or Junji Ito's Army of One, aka Billions Alone? Have you ever wondered what Fear and Hunger would be like if it wasn't made for masochists? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then you absolutely need to play Look Outside, a $10 RPG survival horror hybrid with a demo available on itch.io. This is an unqualified recommendation. Look Outside is a delight that more than justifies its modest price tag, with a ton going for it. Go ahead, stop the video, come back later if you want. I care more about people playing this amazing game than I do my watch time. Now then, if you're still here, let me give you the long version. Look Outside is an RPGMaker game released on March 21st, 2025, available on Steam. The game is set within an apartment building while a strange phenomenon has started to take place globally. There's something out there in the sky, and seeing it changes you in unpredictable ways. The danger, the visitor, will pass in 15 days, and so you need to explore your now dangerous building and fight the terrible monsters who were once your neighbors in order to find supplies, keep yourself sane in isolation, stay alive, and, if you wish, try to uncover what exactly is going on out there. It's not just the people of the apartment building that are being warped by the visitor, though. It's the building, too. The first floor of the building now goes on forever, looping infinitely. Dangerous mold and fleshy growths have overtaken sections of the building, and you might even find areas you just traversed changed in strange ways when you backtrack through them. One of the best selling points of this game is its execution of cosmic horror. It is the fear of the unknown, yes, but it's also the fear of how small you are. The fear of being completely helpless as a situation far beyond your control changes and consumes your life. Despite what the title says, you absolutely should not look outside in this game. In fact, that's one of the first things you can do in the game, and if you do, you're immediately treated to a game over as the sight of the visitor kills the main character, and his insides are sucked out through his mouth. I don't want to talk about the plot of the game too specifically in this video, other than the setup, because I think it's better for you to experience it firsthand. It's told very directly. There's less room for lore and theory crafting with this game than there is in something like Fear and Hunger or FromSoft games, so if you play through the game and read the dialogue, you will be told a solid cosmic horror story. And to be clear, while the game thrives on the sense of the unknown, the indescribable, this is by no means a didn't actually see any monsters kind of horror story like Blair Witch. In fact, there is actually a way to see the visitor, or at least part of it, in this game. While unfortunately, seeing the visitor didn't turn me IRL into some sort of flesh monster, it does sell the scale and incomprehensible nature of what exactly the visitor is very well. Even if you don't get that scene, though, you see a lot of amazing-looking monsters in this game. The art in this game is really impressive, the enemies all look fantastic, and there are a lot of them. The Steam page says there are over 150 unique monsters, and I believe it. The character art also looks amazing. I love the design of the main character, who looks very scared and haggard. There are a lot of recruitable party members in this game too, and they're all well designed, unique from each other, and memorable. Even the less important NPCs who only exist for flavor text have crazy and cool designs. In fact, in terms of the number of unique and memorable NPCs to interact with, this gives Undertale a run for its money. Everyone, whether they're a human or a monster, whether they're plot critical or inconsequential, looks striking. So how does Look Outside play? The gameplay loop is basically this. You venture out of your apartment into the larger building. Each apartment you can enter serves as its own little dungeon, typically with a unique theme. An artist's apartment features painting-themed enemies. A hockey fan's apartment is ice-themed. One apartment has been overgrown and is full of plant-themed enemies. Some of these apartments are completely optional, and some of them have essential key items in them, which let you explore more and more of the building. You go out exploring, looking for loot, like equipment that will help you in combat, food that will keep you alive throughout the 15 days of a playthrough, hygiene products like soap and toothpaste to keep you clean and healthy, or money to trade with other residents who have kept their sanity. As you're exploring, a bar at the bottom of the screen will begin to fill. The more progress you make, the higher this danger bar ticks up. Every time you return to your apartment, you get bonus XP based on how much of the bar you've filled. On normal mode, you only get the ability to save your game by returning to your apartment after the first major milestone of this bar has been reached, and if the bar fills completely, then extremely dangerous shadow enemies will begin to hunt you, highly encouraging you to return to your apartment and bank those experience points. Of course, as you're exploring the apartment building, you are going to get into battles with the various monstrosities along your way, people and things that have been warped beyond recognition by observing the visitor. The combat system itself is going to be familiar to anyone who has played a turn-based RPG before. Your party picks their moves, and then everyone goes based on an unseen turn priority. You can always use a basic attack, but each character also has skills, which they can spend stamina, this game's equivalent of MP, to use, which are more powerful than standard attacks. Each character does have unique skills they can learn that are inherent to them, but each weapon also has unique skills that anyone using that weapon gets access to. Each character can hold a melee weapon in one hand and a ranged weapon in the other, although there are some two-handed weapons like sledgehammers or rifles that are very powerful, but prevent that character from using a weapon of the other type. Survival horror games are about resource scarcity. They're about the feeling that you're going to run out of an essential item and no longer be able to progress. Look Outside is pretty generous with healing items, and with stamina refilling items, but the resource I find most stressful to manage here is weapon durability. All of the melee weapons you'll be using have a chance to break every time you swing them. Makeshift weapons like a broom or a mop are a lot more fragile than items like an axe or a baseball bat. Each weapon can break twice. The first break does not prevent you from using it, it's more of a warning that you want to switch that weapon out ASAP. The name of the item will also often change to warn you that an item is in disrepair, and an icon appears over the item in the inventory screen if it's broken once. A pool cue becomes a crooked pool cue when it breaks, a baseball bat becomes a cracked baseball bat, and so on. Some rare weapons are even able to break 3 times total, though there are sparingly few of these in the game. Items which have been broken once can be repaired by duct tape, but there's not a ton of duct tape to go around, so you typically only want to use it on rare or unique weapons, or weapons with skills you know you want for specific fights. If an already damaged weapon does break a second time, that's it for it. Not only will it be immediately unequipped, leaving you unarmed and defenseless against whatever monster you were fighting, it'll straight up disappear from your inventory and can no longer be repaired. What's more, while each weapon has skills associated with it, and these skills are very powerful, most of them not only have a stamina cost, but an increased chance of breaking the weapon. You're dealing with imperfect information here. A skill might say a slightly increased chance of breaking the weapon, but you don't know what that specifically means. Is that increasing the chance from 5% to 10%, or 25% to 35%? Having imperfect information like that is an important part of the survival horror genre, which adds tension and makes the player feel nervous about using tools in their kit. It's interesting that I'm covering this shortly after the Shadow Tower games, because this weapon durability loop and the way it's used to build horror is similar between them. It's a fairly uncommon way of handling survival horror elements, but both the Shadow Tower games and Look Outside build their tension and horror through the unspoken fear that you're going to run out of good weapons and be unable to continue the game. Although in reality, both Shadow Tower and Look Outside throw weapons at you so frequently, this isn't likely to happen. What is more likely to happen, if you're not careful, is running out of weapons of a specific type when you need them. A very long dungeon around the midpoint of the game, which I'm not going to go into specifics about, is filled with enemies that are weak to slashing damage, but resistant to pierce. On one of my playthroughs for this video, I ran out of intact weapons that could deal slashing damage about halfway through the dungeon, and had to decide whether I was going to keep using my knives and axes that were damaged once, or switch to less effective crushing weapons like hammers. This particular dungeon is among the harder sections of the game, and is full of enemies that can self-destruct for massive damage if you don't kill them fast enough. And since I was playing on normal mode, which doesn't have autosaves, I was running a very real risk of my party wiping and losing a significant chunk of progress if I didn't keep using my slashing weapons, but using them meant they might break completely, leaving me without any sources of slashing damage by the time I'd cleared the dungeon. That's the kind of risk-reward consideration that the survival horror genre thrives on. I am nervous about making the wrong decision, and that makes me more susceptible to the scares. As I said earlier, each party member in the game has a completely unique set of skills and playstyle. Look Outside has a surprising number of potentially recruitable party members, 12 in total, not including the player character. These unique hooks are generally pretty interesting. For example, one party member, Dan, is a Twitch streamer, and his abilities are all based on the number of viewers he has. Dan has 2 stances you can choose from on the first turn of each battle, an attacker stance that lets him do hard-hitting attacks that deal element damage, or effects like stuns, and a support stance that lets him do things like heal other party members. The skills in these stances will either increase his viewer count or spend those viewers to do a powerful skill. Another party member is actually 2 party members, Montgomery and Zarya, who are very powerful and come with guns if you recruit them, but will only join your party if you have room for both of them. And since you only have 4 slots total, one of which is always filled by the player character, that's a significant trade-off. I've never recruited these 2 in my playthroughs, so I can only speak about them secondhand. Fun fact, they're also a direct reference to companions from the original Baldur's Gate, Zar and Montaran, who had the same gimmick of only being usable in parties as a pair. At least that's what I've read. I've never played Baldur's Gate 1, sorry. The reason I've never recruited Montgomery and Zarya is because a lot of the companions in the game are completely random. Of the 12 recruitable party members, I'm counting Montgomery and Zarya as a single recruit here, 6 of them are found throughout the apartment building and are guaranteed to be possible to recruit if you know what you're doing, while the other 6 are random encounters you may or may not get in a given run. There's a decent chunk of randomization in this game. Enemy drops are randomized from loot tables. Certain containers seem to give randomized loot, but the most obvious randomized element are the random encounters that can occur when you're in your apartment. Whenever you do anything in your apartment, cooking a meal or crafting an item, there's a chance someone will start knocking on your door. When you approach the door, you can look out the eye hole to see who or what is outside. And these encounters can be traveling merchants selling powerful items, people in need asking for help, potential party members looking for a place to crash, or of course, people, or monsters, trying to trick you into opening the door so they can attack. You can always turn whoever's at the door away if you find them too suspicious, but there's a chance you'll be missing out on some really powerful weapons, items, or party members. I actually did encounter Montgomery and Zarya very early on in my first playthrough as a random encounter, one of the first random encounters I'd seen occur, but I thought the game was trying to trick me, so I turned them away. As the 15-day time limit goes on, these random encounters tend to become more dangerous, and some of the ones that would be beneficial early on have become combat encounters as more and more people look outside. Of course, you only need to recruit 3 party members in a given playthrough. Anything more than that is overkill, and you don't really want to swap party members in and out because experience isn't shared to members who are just killing time in your apartment. What I'm saying is, don't feel like you're missing out if you don't recruit all 12 party members in a single playthrough, or if you find out you missed your chance at getting one of the 6 guaranteed party members. You really aren't meant to get everyone. This is meant to add replayability, not be a checklist of how to play correctly. That 15-day timer on a playthrough isn't ticking down based on any kind of real-time clock, rather time progresses when you take specific actions. While you're exploring, entering an area for the first time will move the clock forward slightly, while in your apartment, actions like cooking meals, taking showers, brushing your teeth, playing video games, or sleeping will pass the time. It's not just passing the time though. If you go too long without eating, or taking care of your hygiene, or sleeping, you'll get hungry, or you'll feel gross, or you'll get tired, all of which inflict stat penalties on your character. Relaxation and socialization are also important, because if your morale gets too low or your loneliness gets too high, you'll get similar stat penalties. Playing and beating games, which each take a few play sessions in your apartment, also unlocks corresponding combat skills based on the game. For example, beating the game Super Jump Lad unlocks a jump attack skill that scales its damage based on your agility stat. These skills further incentivize you to return to your apartment and pass time, especially since you can find more games as you explore, with 20 games in total to find throughout the apartment building. Don't let the 15-day time limit stress you out too much. It's actually extremely generous for the length of the game. My first completed playthrough, I wasn't engaging with playing games because they took a lot of time, generally 2 hours per session, and I wasn't sure how much time I had to spare. The answer is a lot of it. I ended up getting the perfect ritual ending on day 6 of 15, more than half of the time limit left. The only situations where that timer is actually going to be stressful is if you're achievement hunting or replaying the game for score. You are scored at the end, and there are some bonuses and modifiers, one of which being completing the game by the end of the 3rd day, which I have done, and it is pretty tight. Since time passes whenever you enter a new area, not in any real time, what that 3-day limit really means is that you skip most of the optional areas of the game, which is of course going to lead to you being underpowered and resource-starved by the end. I think these systems are really cool. It's a very different method of incorporating a survival horror resource loop into an RPG from what, say, Fear and Hunger did, which makes the game feel very unique, and which gives the game a really compelling loop. Each expedition you make out of the apartment has a different short-term goal in mind, so even if you don't understand what the shape of the game overall is and what you're trying to do to get the true ending until around the middle of the game, you still feel like you're accomplishing things and making progress every step of the way. I do think these resources you're managing need some tweaks though. The game is still actively being rebalanced, so in case the dev ends up seeing this video, I want to offer 2 specific pieces of feedback. First, as far as I can tell, there's no place to see meters or precise numbers for these stats like hygiene, hunger, and so on. That might be intentional. Again, imperfect information is a tool for building horror, but there is a balance between giving the player imperfect information and giving them insufficient information. In this case, I think it makes the feedback of getting +5 to hygiene or -5 to calm feel off. Like, if I see I get +5 to social, I don't actually have the perspective to know what that means practically. I would suggest that if you don't want to surface these meters directly, add a panel to the menu that has less precise statuses in them, representing ranges of values. I'm thinking of how Resident Evil displays health for reference. The Resident Evil games do have exact hit point numbers for the player character, but they don't surface the exact number of hit points you have. They just tell you fine, caution, or danger to represent specific ranges of health. That works there because the tension is built by not knowing precisely how many hit points you have, but when you heal up, the point of reference of knowing you went from danger to caution or from caution to fine makes that feedback feel good. I know that using a first aid spray has done something, and I can see that it's done more than a green herb would. Maybe something like this is in the game somewhere and I'm just an idiot, but I've poked around the menus quite a bit and I haven't found anything like it. The other piece of feedback is that, at least on normal mode, which is the only mode I've touched, I don't think these statuses deplete fast enough to make this system feel like it matters unless you're doing challenge runs. My first playthrough, all the way up through getting the perfect ritual ending, I wasn't actually even sure if the stats like calm and social were real or if they were just flavor text, because I never had the corresponding stat penalties pop for anything other than hygiene, which only popped up once or twice and was quickly corrected. I'm not saying I need these to be wildly punishing, but if these systems are in the game and I'm playing the game on normal difficulty, they should be something I'm actually thinking about, a mechanic I have to engage with, and not just something that's completely mitigated by checking the laptop every day. I didn't even play a single game on my successful perfect ritual ending, which, again, was the first ending I got, and I had no problem managing these hidden stats. This is by no means a fatal flaw with the game as is now, but I think these stats could use some rebalancing. This game is getting a lot of comparisons to Fear and Hunger, which makes sense. They're both RPGMaker games with cosmic horror premises that are absolutely stuffed full of secrets, weird interactions, and randomized elements that can absolutely redefine a given playthrough. Because this game has been getting so many comparisons to Fear and Hunger, though, I think it's worth talking about how it's different from Fear and Hunger, because Fear and Hunger is a very divisive game, and while I think the comparisons to it are valid here, they're not comparisons to the parts of Fear and Hunger that tend to put people off of it. I also don't want people to go into this expecting it to be one-to-one with Fear and Hunger, because they are different games. Look Outside is not a watered-down Fear and Hunger. The comparison is there, but the game has its own identity, and I want to make sure people understand the differences between the two because of how much I've seen that comparison get thrown around. The most obvious difference between Look Outside and Fear and Hunger is the difficulty. Look Outside is by no means an easy game. Playing on normal difficulty, I've died a lot in this game and lost significant progress. However, it's not the harrowing experience that Fear and Hunger is. If you haven't played Fear and Hunger, I have a video about it that I'll link in the description, but suffice to say that Fear and Hunger is as much a test of patience as it is of strategy. If you're going to finish Fear and Hunger, you will restart many times until you know the entire game like the back of your hand. With Look Outside, by the time I got the game's golden ending, the perfect ritual ending, I had restarted my game a grand total of once, and even then it wasn't because my initial save file was unsalvageable, it's because I wanted to try some different things in the early game. I'm writing this video less than a month after Look Outside was released, so it is worth mentioning that the game is still a bit of a moving target right now. Just a few days ago, at the time of writing, patch 1.02 was released, which did rebalance several weapons, enemies, and fixed some bugs I didn't realize were bugs that I'd been taking advantage of. Still, the game doesn't have the same cruelty streak that Fear and Hunger does, and even on my subsequent playthroughs where I'm going for challenge runs, it's very manageable. It provides an appropriate level of challenge for those seeking it. A large part of that difference in difficulty is that unlike Fear and Hunger, Look Outside is an RPG in the most traditional sense. You defeat enemies to earn experience points and level up. Leveling increases your stats and gives you new skills. It is still very much a survival horror game. You are still often going to be better served avoiding enemies than fighting them, especially because this game presents you with a lot of bosses that you're not going to be prepared to fight yet early on, but in Fear and Hunger, fighting an enemy was only worth it if you knew that enemy had something you needed. In Look Outside, you are always rewarded with XP for killing a monster. There are still a limited number of monsters to fight, and like many of my favorite RPGs, you aren't fighting the same generic enemies over and over again. Most encounters are unique, or are only repeated a handful of times within a specific area. The teeth enemies don't pop up everywhere, they pop up in the tooth-themed apartment. The painting enemies are only found within the artist's apartment, the mold enemies within the moldy basement. This keeps the game from feeling repetitive, since you're only fighting each monster a handful of times. Perhaps more important than the difficulty, though, are the tonal differences between Fear and Hunger and Look Outside. Fear and Hunger is not only difficult, it's bleak and oppressive. There are jokes in Fear and Hunger at points, but Fear and Hunger is trying to be as demoralizing as possible. It's trying to overwhelm you not only with difficulty, but with atmosphere and with upsetting moments. Look Outside nails the cosmic horror. It is a scary game when it wants to be, but it's not trying to be viscerally upsetting and bleak in the way Fear and Hunger is, even in the face of the apocalypse. A lot of the dialogue in the game would not feel out of place in Earthbound or Undertale, and a lot of the monsters you encounter wind up being more sad than scary, even if they are still threatening. For example, the Fredericks. On the first floor of the building, you can find the warped apartment of a painter named Frederick, who attempted to paint the visitor who is now warping the world. Not only has Frederick gone a bit mad from this, but other paintings, self-portraits, sprang to life right off the canvas. Each of the clones is off in its own way, and most of them want to convince you to kill all the others, so they're the last Fred standing. Some of these Fredericks are very funny, like a centipede-esque Fred who tries to convince you he's the real one despite being a centipede man, or a biblically accurate angel Fred who wants to convince you of its divinity by shouting at you. Others, though, are genuinely sad, like the Fred who bites things, a Fred with far too many mouths who can't help but bite anyone who gets close, despite not wanting to. Or Tumor Fred, a Frederick who got the short end of the stick, becoming a mass of limbs and flesh that looks to be in constant, excruciating pain. You find this Fred in the bathroom of the apartment, surrounded by painkillers and anxiety medications, and unlike most of the Freds who ask you to kill all the others so they're the last ones standing, this Fred asks you to put him out of his misery. This is not the only example of this. You have the Tooth family apartment, you have your encounter with Jean, you have everything that happens with the fungus in the basement. Many of the monsters within the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger are implied to have once been humans, and most of the enemies in Fear and Hunger 2 are humans who were moon-scorched, in a way not dissimilar to the corruption of the Visitor in Look Outside, but neither Fear and Hunger game spends a lot of time reminding you that the monsters you're fighting are victims too. Look Outside does this constantly, adding a wistful sadness to the horror. This extends to many of the endings of the game too, none of which are strictly happy, no matter how well you do in the game. I think the most important distinction between Fear and Hunger and Look Outside, though, is the less explicit nature of Look Outside. Fear and Hunger's contents have gotten it straight up banned in some countries. If Fear and Hunger went through the ESRB, it would be an AO rated title, no doubt about it. It's set as an adult-only title on Steam, and oh boy, there's a reason for that. Look Outside does not use nudity in the same way Fear and Hunger did, and it certainly doesn't use, let's say, sex crimes in the way that Fear and Hunger did. If you are someone who found that to be a deal breaker about Fear and Hunger, you do not need to be concerned about that with this game. It isn't an element here. Another big difference from the first Fear and Hunger is that the environments are not randomized. Every playthrough of Fear and Hunger 1 has a slightly different layout for the dungeon, piecing various handmade layouts together. It's worth mentioning that even the sequel to Fear and Hunger abandoned this. The layout of Look Outside is set, though as mentioned earlier, elements of the game, such as loot and apartment encounters, are randomized. Look Outside is similar to Fear and Hunger in some ways, but it's also similar to Earthbound in some ways, and to Undertale in some ways, and even has some direct similarities to games like Baldur's Gate if you look for them. This game has its own identity and deserves to be thought of as more than just a Hunger-like, because I found this game very unique and refreshing in the same way I found Fear and Hunger unique and refreshing when I first played it in 2022. So, with so many key differences, why is this game getting so many Fear and Hunger comparisons? Well, there's a very similar design ethos at heart here. The thing which made Fear and Hunger special, in my opinion, was how the game had so many little hidden interactions, which you might never think to do, but which could help you stack the odds in your favor as the game went on. Recruiting Moonless, saving Lagarde, any number of different endings for the girl. When I think of Fear and Hunger, these are the moments I remember. Things that most players will miss on their first, second, fifth time through the game, but which feel oh so rewarding when you do find them. Look Outside does this as masterfully as Fear and Hunger did. Take, for example, the Grinning Beast. Very early on in the game, right when you reach floor 2, you pick up a key at the end of a hallway, and as you walk back where you came from, you find the hallway stretched far beyond what you walked through to reach the key. As you pass by a door, you hear something pounding on it trying to get out, and a gigantic monster called the Grinning Beast ends up chasing you. This is one of those you are not expected to beat this boss fights. It's hard, the boss hits hard, and you don't have a lot of resources available to you yet. Look Outside contains a lot of these boss fights you're intended to run from, and will even warn you by saying you have an urge to run away at the beginning of combat if you engage with an enemy significantly higher level than you are. At this point, you've only had access to the 3rd floor hallway you start at, the stairwell, the apartment where your tutorial happens, and one other neighbor's apartment that serves as a short dungeon. None of the other floors are accessible from the stairwell yet. You'll likely only be level 2 or 3 by this point. At best, if you cleared your neighbor's apartment first and got the crafting kit, you might have a Molotov or two to throw at it. If you turn around and fight this boss normally, you'll almost certainly die. However, on the bottom floor of the apartment stairwell, you can find a dead tenant with a pool cue weapon lying next to him. The pool cue is nothing amazing at first glance. It has okay stats, but nothing obviously game-breaking. And as a makeshift weapon, it's very fragile and likely to break after only a few attacks. But the pool cue has a unique skill associated with it, which allows you to spear an enemy. This is, no exaggeration, the most overpowered skill in the entire game. It hits hard and has a very high chance of breaking the weapon, but it has a chance of instantly killing the enemy it hits. Bosses are not immune to this effect. If you get lucky and the pool cue doesn't break, or you save up all your duct tape for the pool cue, you can trivialize a lot of the game's most difficult moments with it. If you hit the Grinning Beast with this pool cue skill and proc the instant kill ability, you can actually defeat this meant-to-lose boss fight. Then, if you backtrack down the hall to the door the beast burst out of, you can find that it's transformed back into a human woman. The Grinning Woman, Lee. Lee is one of only a handful of vendors in the game, the first you can possibly unlock. She is positioned across the hall from an apartment that will later turn into the primary shop in the game, restocked with new items every day, but even if you're not going to buy anything from Lee, you can sell your items to her, unlike the shop across the hall. Aside from Lee, the next nearest merchant you can sell items to is several floors away, so it can be extremely convenient to have Lee here to offload your loot and buy things from the nearby shop. On the other hand, if you don't want to keep Lee as a merchant, she can also become a party member, and she's very powerful because she can transform back into the Grinning Beast during combat. This is a very dangerous move because, while powerful, it also initially confuses her, making her just as likely to attack a fellow party member as an enemy. Even if you don't use her transformation skill, getting Lee is an enormous advantage in the early game, available far earlier than most other options. Getting a party member is huge. It doubles your possible actions and the health pool of your party splitting damage, and so this can really help when you're clearing early areas, specifically the first floor. Another great example, also in the early game, is the Rat King boss on the first floor. The Rat King stalks the hallway of the first floor, which is otherwise devoid of monsters. Like the Grinning Beast, it's very dangerous for the point in the game where it is introduced, and is best avoided unless you have a specific strat in mind for dealing with it. The first floor of the building in general is infested with rats and rat monsters, including another dangerous boss, the Rat Freak, who is guarding a progression critical item. The most obvious way of clearing this section of the game would be to avoid the Rat King and juke around the Rat Freak to grab the disc you need, clear the lesser rat monsters for the XP, and then come back at a much higher level and kill the two bosses. Once again, this is a very deadly boss for how early you encounter it, but getting lucky with the pool cue can take care of it for you no problem. Not only does this give you a solid chunk of XP, it drops its rat crown. If you put the rat crown on, a few things happen. The rat crown has really solid stats for how early it's available in game, and it gives you a special skill, the Vomit skill, which deals acid damage to enemies at the cost of 30 of your HP. If you're wearing the rat crown, then all of the rats and rat monsters left on the floor will become non-hostile to you, and you can even talk to them for some cute flavor text. This makes several of the apartments on this floor trivial to explore and find a bunch of loot, and some of the rats will even give you useful items. One of the rat monsters gives you a burrito, another will sell you a wheel of cheese once per day, and most significantly, the other rat boss, the rat freak, will give you a unique weapon, the rat claws. The rat claws are a two-handed weapon, meaning you have to use them at expense of having a gun equipped, but they're very powerful for the early game because they attack twice per turn and can cause bleeding on enemies. These actually pair fairly nicely with the rat crown because acid damage can also apply a damage over time debuff. Oh, and that vomit ability is actually really useful on the first floor because that's where the Frederick's apartment is. See, one of the coolest things about this game is that enemies are almost always weak to a specific type of damage and often resistant to another type, and you can logic it out pretty well. An enemy with prominent eyeballs all over its body isn't going to have a good time with piercing attacks or bullets. A plant that's been mutated is going to be weak to fire, and an enemy that's made out of hands and fingers isn't going to like slashing attacks that chop those fingers right off. The Fredericks, being paintings, are extremely weak to acid damage. You can get flasks of turpentine in the apartment that work like acid grenades, but if you're walking in with the rat crown, it can be worth taking the 30 points of damage when fighting some of the more difficult Fredericks for some extra damage, especially if you have a second party member who can be chucking those flasks at a Frederick while you're chucking your lunch at him instead. Of course, the Rat King is a higher level and more difficult boss than any of the Fredericks, so if you're playing through the game normally, you'll probably get the crown far later into the game, and while it's still a decent headpiece, it's not as useful late game as it was early on. In addition to the randomized elements, a ton of endings to find, and the achievements and scoring once you beat the game suggesting several types of challenge runs like never eating, never sleeping, or never recruiting any party members, these little interactions found throughout the entire game make Look Outside extremely replayable. If you're the kind of person who likes chasing S-ranks in Resident Evil, you can get a lot of mileage out of Look Outside's very demanding score system. A first playthrough will probably take you 6 to 10 hours, longer if you end up restarting like I did, of course. But you could play the game over and over again, and no two runs will end up exactly the same. I think that's really cool, and actually pretty rare for an RPG, so it makes this game really engaging and special. When I got my first ending, I couldn't wait to start the game over and play it all again, trying a different build, a different ending, and a different type of challenge run. Look Outside is not perfect by any means, and it's still being actively updated with balance changes and bug fixes. There are some places I would like to see the game expanded in the future. Specifically, there are currently easy and normal modes, but no hard mode yet, and I think a mode that really ramped up the difficulty in a way that required you to scrape your way through the game by carefully stacking every possible system in your favor could be really compelling. But even if that time never comes, I think the game as it is now, shortly after launch, is absolutely worth your time. There are a lot of secrets, twists, and hidden interactions in this game I didn't talk about, not to mention a story that goes to some extremely surprising places by the end. Look Outside is phenomenal. I've put 25 hours into it already, and I've only seen a fraction of the endings. I haven't even met half of the party members. While this video has spoiled some really cool moments in the game to entice you to play it, I've made sure to only discuss things that happen within the first half of the game, so rest assured, there's a lot of cool stuff left to find if you play the game for yourself. I think this unassuming little RPGMaker game is going to be a genuine contender for my Game of the Year, and I really want more people to play it. I wasn't planning on making this video. I've got other projects I've been working on and didn't have a Look Outside video on my schedule, but when I started playing this game, I realized it was an emergency. This game is really special, and I hope it finds the audience it deserves. Friends, if you're still watching this, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. If you liked the video, please consider leaving a like, a comment, and subscribing, and if you're looking for something else to watch, I've recently released deep dives into 2 of From Software's classic dungeon crawlers, Shadow Tower and Shadow Tower Abyss, and I'll have one about Eternal Ring coming before long. I also want to thank my Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members, who have given their real-life money to help me keep making content. I've got a stretch goal right now to cover the games Pathologic and Pathologic 2 when I hit $300 a month in direct support between the two platforms, so if you're interested in helping reach that goal, or you want to see supporter-exclusive videos and updates about what's coming to the channel, consider checking Patreon or memberships out. If not though, hey, just watching this video is more than enough. Axel the Axe, Chaothic, Pizza Requiem, Panozny Koriznik, Rules in Place, Murray SQZ, Raxarox, Mikaru X, Unhealthy Caillou, Sir Darkon, Rachel Aurelia, Captain Swing, Devale, Mouse V, Lieria, Theodore Divini, Noah Phoenix, The Smallest Church in Wienerville, Gassan Abanura, Patricia Frabetti, Sninkelberg, Ziggy the 31st, Frondi, Yo-Yo Jojo Mojo, Tsai Voafehi, Dan Luther, Still Just Cow, Jose Armalas, William, Cabbage, Rekka, Alex Smith, Picayune, Hakan Boyam, Pete Lee, Shiny Emptyhead, That's All, Bell Mage, and Malachi Murphy. Until next time, everyone, take care.